Got a call, and it was from a young man whose dad had been attending our church for about the last 6 months to a year. He told me that his dad was taken to the hospital this past weekend, and there was at one point over the weekend a sense that his dad wasn't going to make it, but that through much prayer and wonderful doctors and medicine, his dad had made kind of a complete, almost miraculous recovery. And though he was still in ICU, he was alert and able to talk and such. And his son was asking me if I would come and make a visit to him. Now, I don't do that many hospital visits. In fact, if a call comes in like this, and this is exactly how we handled it this week, we'll have one of our elders go and shepherd our church in that way and make one of those visits. And so Tuesday evening at our elders meeting, I asked our elders who could go, and as it turned out, literally none of them could go within the next 24 hours or so. And so yesterday afternoon, I went myself and I made the visit. And I had a really rich conversation with this gentleman. I don't think I'd ever met him before. He claimed that he sits back here somewhere, and I believe him. He was quoting my sermons back to me, so I had to believe him. But it was kind of wild just to kind of listen to his story of the transformation that's taken place in his life over the last 6 months to a year. A man who in some ways has been on a journey for 30 years, trying to sort things out about life and faith, has at different seasons tried to be part of churches. And today, his son sent me an email, and I just need to read a little bit of this to you. He said, "Over the past year, Suncrest has been a safe place where my dad can come and get to know Jesus." He talked about how after I left, he and his dad had a conversation, and his dad said, it's my time. I didn't come up on that day when they had everyone come up and be baptized, but I need to take this step of baptism. And then his son said to not just me, but to you, "Thank you for proclaiming the name of Jesus in such a significant yet accessible way for so many to experience the love and grace of God." And you can probably imagine that I am still kind of blown away. I mean, I have a front row seat to this. Year in and year out, month in and month out, I see transformation take place right in front of me. Our church wants to be used by God to change lives. And yet, every time I see it in such a dramatic way, I am blown away. But I'm also reminded of something. That as powerful as it is that you create a welcoming environment here, that you would help someone feel comfortable in this place, let them know they're accepted exactly as they are when they walk in the door. And as hard as we work to kind of teach this message and let people see it, there is still a major variable that we have no control over. And that variable is whether someone is open to the message of Jesus or not. Truly open. Heart open. Mind open. Prepared for an encounter with God that could transform them. To me, that's why it's so important to do a series like this. To say, we're going to lay out who Jesus is. It really, though, is up to you whether you're open to it or not. And that's why I've kind of been saying this, that this is my request for your spiritual journey, that you would let Jesus define himself. That you would let him be who he is, that you would be open to his message, even the parts of it that are uncomfortable, the parts that are transformational, the parts that are life-changing. To not just settle for it, but let Jesus define himself in your life. I use this phrase, spiritual journey, sometimes. I know it's kind of a generic phrase, but I want to ask you a question today. Here's my question. So where are you on your spiritual journey right now? Or maybe I could ask it this way. What's going on in your spiritual journey right now? I kind of get the sense, maybe someone wants to ask me, Greg, what do you mean, what's going on in my spiritual journey? And my answer to that question is, I'm not totally sure what I'm asking you myself, but it probably has something to do with this. You could think of it in terms of trajectory. Like, what direction is your spiritual journey going right now? Is it going up and to the right, or is it on the path to a valley? What do you anticipate the next turn in that spiritual journey to be? Do you anticipate something going wrong, or do you anticipate something going right? I don't know, maybe it's about your thought processes about God. 'Tis the season for movies and documentaries and such to explore the historicity of Jesus and his message and the Gospels. And maybe that's stirring something in you to think about something intellectually about who God is and what it means for you. Maybe that's what your spiritual journey, chances are it has something to do with a situation you are in or facing right now. A situation that could be a top of the mountain situation, or a situation that could be that tomorrow is uncertain. All of those things intersect with our spiritual journeys. And the reason I ask you that question specifically today is that I want you to think about where you are in your spiritual journey in light of the way Jesus is going to define himself with this particular I am statement. So wherever you are, think of it in these terms. Here's what Jesus says about himself in John chapter 10. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And then he repeats himself, one of the few places where he is repetitive about his I am statement. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Why would Jesus choose this image? The image of a shepherd and his sheep. You know, a couple of weeks ago when I was teaching, the image was a vine and the branches. He loves these kind of images. Last week when Dan taught us, it's the gate or the door, and or actually just happened just a few verses before he announces that he's the good shepherd. But here he says, I'm the good shepherd. Why would he do that? Well, I know a couple of reasons why he did it. First of all, for the people who were listening to him, they would have completely understood what everyday shepherding looks like. They would have understood it in a way that you and I have no hope of understanding it. I don't know about you, but my understanding of shepherding goes something like this. Well, on the night Jesus was born, you know, these angels, they were in the sky, and then the shepherds went, and it was the most peaceful setting ever. A baby who I'm sure wasn't crying. Shepherds who were perfectly clean. Have you ever seen their robes in the manger scenes? They're perfectly clean. Like, that's my image, a caricature of a shepherd. I can promise you that is not the image that was in these people's minds when they heard shepherd, because they knew shepherd. They knew shepherds were devoted to their sheep, and I'm not trying to insult you, but they knew sheep were dumb. And in this image, Jesus is the shepherd, and we are the sheep. He knew that shepherding was the kind of occupation that would be featured on dirty jobs. That it's the kind of occupation that was messy, it was lower class, it was perceived to be, just grunt work. But for a shepherd who cared, and Jesus is saying he cared, it's an image he's creating. But that's not the only image the listeners of Jesus would have had. There's no doubt the moment he says, I am the good shepherd, any good Jewish person listening, their mind would have went to the words of David. David himself was a shepherd. We'll talk about his story in just a little bit, but he wrote a psalm, the 23rd Psalm, that talks about God. It says, the Lord is my shepherd. And actually, I don't want you to miss this, that in kind of the chaos of the encounter Jesus is having with teaching people, he's stirring something up that's going to end up very chaotic. By the time Jesus is done teaching this passage, there are going to be some religious leaders who are around him who start to pick up rocks. And the Bible tells us the reason they're picking up rocks is they are preparing to stone Jesus. Jesus encounters them as they're picking up these rocks and has a little conversation with them. And in John chapter 10, verse 33, about 15 verses after this passage, get this, Jesus says, why are you going to stone me? And they say, we are not stoning you for any good work. They replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Jesus never said, I am God. But the moment he said, I am the good shepherd, everyone knew what he meant. He was saying, I'm God. I'm the Lord. And people were so mad about it that they wanted to kill him. So with that setting and that backdrop, let me kind of get at the heart of the passage. I think it gets to something that's very close to every human being. It's the question of relationships. And this is, I think, the key question, or a key question when it comes to relationships that we're in. The question is, Am I worth it? Am I worth it? Now, you and I, we gauge worth on a number of levels. Last week, my family had the chance to be in Arizona for spring break. My in-laws have a place out there, and it's just really nice to get away. And, usually when I'm here, I feel like my brain is really active, and physically, I do next to nothing. So on spring break, I flip that, right? I'm going to do everything physical, and I try to turn my brain off for a week. And so we did some hiking. My son and I climbed the top of Camelback Mountain. I tried my hand at mountain biking, which left some marks on my arm and my legs and lots of other places. I gave up on mountain biking after just a short distance and took another hike instead with my family. This hike had been described to us as kind of a simple hike. We were going to go up to Wind Cave. Anybody ever been to Wind Cave just outside of Phoenix? So we were told, hey, this is going to be kind of a leisurely hike, and you're going to go to enjoy a cave. Great. I have my kids, my wife, my father-in-law, and a few others who dropped off on the way because it wasn't such an easy hike. We finally got up to Wind Cave, and it was pure disappointment. My daughter is looking around, and she says, is this a cave? This is a dent in the side of the mountain. We come down, and my daughter, who is not generally very expressive, gets to the bottom, and the people who had dropped off the hike on the way up asked her about it. She said, it's a hike up the mountain, it's a dent in the side of the mountain, then you walk down the mountain, hashtag not worth it. And I would tend to agree. Ever given the chance, skip it. We judge things like that. Was it worth it? Was it worth the effort? Was it worth... And in some situations, in non-relational situations, sometimes we can actually parse things out a little bit and decide which parts we want, right? Our building project right now, it's out for bid. We're going to receive the bids back in about 10 days or so. And we're having the contractors bid the project. And on a few circumstances, we said, we want you to bid this part separately so we can decide at the end whether we want to do that part or not, right? And we're going to have the luxury at the end to say, oh, well, if it's going to cost that much, let's delay that or set that on the side. In non-relationships, you get to parse things out. But in relationships, you either have to decide, this relationship is worth it or not. I'm going to take it for everything it is or it's not. Like, you don't get to have a relationship where you're like, well, I like her physical beauty, but I'm going to cut out the annoying laugh. You don't get to do that. You don't get to say, well, he's rich in conversation, but, the body odor, that's, you take it all or you take none of it. That's the nature of relationships. And I think that creates a real dilemma for relationships. Because I have to imagine that every one of us has had friendships somewhere along the way where we just kind of decided, you know what, it's not worth it. And I'm not scolding you for that. I just think that's human nature. You know what, it's not worth it. There's too much drama. There's too much something. I have other things going on in my life. It's not worth it. And sometimes we directly cut them off. Most of the time we just let them fade away. But we just say it's not worth it. There are certain relationships that we're in where we brought children into the world or where we made a vow of marriage to someone where you don't really give yourself that freedom. At least you shouldn't. And instead you say, the relationship, for all of its goods and all of its bads, I'm in it no matter what. That's a powerful place to be in a relationship where you've decided this is worth it. Actually, there's a psychologist named John Eldredge who wrote a book about 15 years ago. And he was suggesting, I actually think this is a little too heavy on the stereotype, but work with it for a second. He suggested that in a marriage relationship, there's essentially one question every man is asking and one question every woman is asking. He said the question every man is asking is, do I have what it takes? And that his wife is essentially the one and only judge that he cares about. And so if the wife communicates to her husband that he has what it takes, that he's worth it, that really matters. And the suggestion was that the woman in a relationship might be asking the question, am I worth being pursued? And while lots of guys would say, well, of course you're worth being pursued. It doesn't really matter what the guy says. It matters how the guy acts. Does he love his wife in a way that demonstrates she is worthy of his pursuit? Because we ask these questions, is it worth it? That's a key question when it comes to relationships. And Jesus, in this passage, frames his relationship with us in kind of the same way. In John chapter 10, verse 10, this is the verse before he announced that he was the good shepherd. It's actually the last verse of last week's passage. This is what he says. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. Now, I want you to see what's happening here. What's Jesus announcing? Here's what Jesus is announcing. That Jesus has a vision for you. And the vision for you is this. That life with him is worth any cost to us. This is the vision he's trying to cast for you. Don't miss this. He's saying, listen, I have a life for you. It's an abundant life. It's a full life. It's full of fulfillment. Ultimately, it's full of eternity with God. I'm telling you, this is worth it. Does it come without cost? No, it doesn't. It actually comes with great cost at times. That's why I need you to decide that it's worth it. Because I want you to go through the cost. I want you to give up certain things in life and believe that instead of chasing your own thing, if you chase this with me, it will be worth it. It's there. It's real. He's bringing us abundant life. But it's not just a vision that he casts to you to be committed to him because it's worth it. Actually, the whole power of Jesus is that he goes first. And so after he casts that vision, he wants to make sure you know who he is. And here's what he says. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And in this passage, Jesus is going to demonstrate 3 ways that he is committed to us. He wants you to embrace his vision, that you would be committed to him, that following his life is worth it, and there's a great life in front of you. But he only asks you to do that in response to who he is to you. And he's telling you, I am your shepherd. And before I ask you to commit to me, this is what you need to know from me to you. Let me describe this to you. Because I think wherever you are on your spiritual journey right now, this could really, really matter. First of all, Jesus says that his care is not transactional. This is his commitment to you, that he will care for you even when there's nothing in it for him. It is not a transactional relationship. This is actually how you get to transformational relationships, when there's a care that goes beyond what's in it for me. And in order to explain this, he refers to kind of another imagery, another illustration. I think you'll be able to follow this. See what he says here. He says, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when the hired hand sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. The wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. He said there are relationships like this, relationships that are purely transactional. He says, trust me, the guy who's hired to do it, he doesn't care about the sheep. He cares about what he's going to get out of watching after the sheep. And then when something comes up, he's going to decide, is it worth it? That's what he's going to decide. And the hired hand has already decided, if it might cost him his life, it is not worth the paycheck that he's going to get. That's how hired hands function. Nothing wrong with it. You just wouldn't want to think that he cares. And all of us have been in relationships like this, where we come to understand we really only love someone to the degree that they do something for us, that they make us happy, that I get something in return. Those are transactional relationships. And what Jesus is announcing when he says, I am the good shepherd, is he's saying, listen, my care for you is not dependent on your behavior. Don't miss this. My care for you, my love for you, it's not dependent on a transaction between us. Here's what he's saying. He's saying, there's nothing you can do to make me love you more. This isn't about your behavior. And more, maybe more importantly, there is nothing you can do that will make me love you less. If your image of Jesus is that he loves you more or he loves you less based on how obedient or disobedient you are, how much you're caring for him, if your image is a transactional relationship with Jesus, then I implore you to let Jesus define himself, because he says it's a different way. He says his care for you is not transactional. Up to and including that a shepherd would give his life for those sheep, as Jesus did for you. For the people who are listening to Jesus, they're probably going back to Psalm 23 in their mind. What does the shepherd do? What does this care really look like? Well, in Psalm 23, it says the shepherd, if you're with him, you won't be in need. He'll lead you beside quiet waters. Wherever you are in your spiritual journey right now, he'll restore your soul. What's a shepherd have? A shepherd has a rod and a staff. And they bring comfort to the sheep. Why do they bring comfort? Well, let me give you two beautiful ways and one difficult way. One of the things the shepherd uses his staff for is when a sheep gets itself into a situation and gets stuck. And the shepherd has to take the staff and grab a hold of the sheep and help him get out of that situation. That's what a good shepherd does. That's what Jesus would do for your situation. The shepherd uses the rod in order to defend. This is actually the image of David. When David is the one who's writing the 23rd Psalm, people are thinking back to the story of David and say, oh, we know what happened with David. David actually was a shepherd boy himself one time. And according to the scriptures, he had to fight off both a bear and a lion to protect his sheep. When something evil, when something with ill intent comes and tries to attack, the one who has the rod will fight for you. So wherever you are in your spiritual journey right now, this is what I know about Jesus. He will fight for you. He will defend you. He will ward off the wolves. That's who he is. Sometimes, in order to ultimately bring you to a good place, the rod and the staff are used to discipline the sheep. Because if the sheep is wandering off, the shepherd says, I'm not okay. And even if I have to bring some pain to the sheep in order to have him walk with me again, it's worth it. This is Jesus' commitment to us as the Good Shepherd. That his care is not based on you, not based on your behavior. His love for you is unconditional. It is not transactional. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced a love like that before. But it is, I promise you, who Jesus is. And he went to the cross to show us that was true. The second thing about Jesus' commitment to us is that he knows you completely. And I don't know about you, but this is the part where if I wasn't blown away by the first element, I think, well, I'm kind of blown away now because I know how I act, right? You know how you act. We talked about this just a few weeks ago, that most of us, we don't experience full love because we don't let ourselves be fully known. And you can only be loved to the degree that you're known. And so there's parts of my life with lots of people where I just don't show them that part of my life. And that way I can kind of manage making sure they keep loving me. But the good shepherd says, I know everything about you, and I still love you. This is what he says. I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. Now, I want you to think about this just in relational terms for a minute. Most of us probably overestimate how well we know people and how much of ourselves we let be known. It's actually a very rare thing to truly know someone and truly be known. This will go very quickly here, but just for a moment, I want you to think of the person who lives next door to you. Okay? You got a picture in your mind? The person who lives next door to you? They might live a long ways away. They might live within 50 feet of your house. They might live in the apartment, like right on the other side of the 2x4, right? Next door to you. The person who lives next door to you, let me ask you a series of questions. I'm curious if you know this about that person. Do you know their name? If you don't know their name, you need to be a better Christian. That's a whole other sermon, but I won't go there. Do you know their name? Do you know their occupation? Do you know their family's name? Like, that's just basic information, right? Do you know their awesome qualities? Like, could you knock on their door tonight on the way home and say, hey, I was just thinking about you at church tonight. You're awesome because of... Do you know their horrible qualities? Don't knock on their door tonight and announce that. Let's go internal to them a little bit. Not just the qualities that you see, but do you know what they hope for? Like their hopes and dreams for this life. Do you know your neighbor's hopes and dreams? Or on the flip side, do you know their fears? If you do, kudos to you. Because most of us just don't really go there in relationships all that often. And one of the reasons we don't go there is we live in kind of a protectionist sort of way where we say, you know what, I'm only going to reveal this much of myself to someone else. Because if I revealed more, I'm not sure they'd accept me, that they would love me. But this is the power of Jesus. That he knows your name. He knows what's awesome about you. And he knows what's horrible about you. He knows what you hope for and what you dream for, and he knows what you're afraid of. And he loves you just the way you are. He's a good shepherd. I know I have one more thing to describe about the nature of Jesus, but before we move on to that, I want to invite Chris out here just for a moment. Chris is going to sing a song just over the next few minutes. And I just want you to take some minutes to reflect kind of so far about who Jesus says he is as the Good Shepherd and what that means for where you are in your spiritual journey right now. Then I'll come back and finish the message. For you that's broken inside, I just want you to know Jesus is the Good Shepherd. He knows every part of it. His love and his care is not dependent on how you've constructed your life. He'd give his life for you regardless. When Jesus is closing this passage, he takes a slight turn, and I think it's an important one for us to think about. And part of his commitment to us is that, so for people who have found this relationship with Christ, it's beautiful. But his commitment is that he actually wants a relationship with everyone. With everyone. And so if we kind of get to a place where we're enamored and moved by who Christ is in our own lives, but then we keep it to ourselves, it actually works against what he's wanted for us. This is how Jesus says it. He says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them in also. And so one of the things I want to be true of our community at Suncrest is that we are absolutely moved by the work of God in our own lives. And then we resolve to make sure we don't just hoard it for ourselves. Listen, this coming weekend is Easter. It is the perfect time for anyone who's had doubts about God or has kept God at arm's length, for anyone who's going through a tough time in their life, if they would give spiritual life a chance. Easter's the perfect time. And I want you to think about, and for me to think about, how do we make sure once we've encountered the Good Shepherd that we help everyone else encounter them too? Let me pray for us and for our church right now and for the week that's ahead of us. And then we'll worship one more time before we go. God, thanks for your goodness to each of us in our lives. Thank you for reminding us that our identity is in light of you and your love for us, not based on our latest accolade or our latest mistake. And God, let our church be a true light to the world that welcomes everyone here to also encounter your message. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.